Welcome to meeting number 71 of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room as well as remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the members and the witnesses as well. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please do mute yourselves when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom is at the bottom of your screen, and you do have a choice of either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. Now, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, February 7th, 2023, the committee commences its study of the destabilizing impacts of the Wagner Group. It is now my great pleasure to welcome before us four witnesses from the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development. We have Ms. Heidi Hulan, the Assistant Deputy Minister and Political Director of International Security Issues. We also have Ms. Marcelle Lebleu, the Director General, West and Central African Bureau. We have Ms. Rebecca Netley, the Executive Director, Accountability, Human Rights, and United Nations Law Division, as well as Mr. Andrew Turner, the Director of Eastern Europe and Eurasia Division. You will be provided a maximum of 8 minutes for your opening remarks, after which we will open it to the members for questions. Ms. Hulan, are you doing the opening remarks? Absolutely. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Really appreciate the invitation to brief the committee as part of your study on the destabilizing impacts of the Wagner Group. The Wagner Group is variously described as a private military company, or PMC, a network of mercenaries, or a de facto private army of Vladimir Putin. It is part of Yevgeny Prigozhin's vast and overlapping network of businesses and private military activities, a network that has been active for decades and enjoys the implicit support of the Russian state. As a private military entity, the Wagner Group first emerged in 2014 during Russia's annexation of Crimea. Since then, it has expanded into the Middle East and Africa, fighting on the side of forces aligned with the Russian government. Beyond its combat role, there are persistent reports of Wagner meddling and destabilizing countries, committing widespread human rights abuses, and extorting natural resources. Yevgeny Prigozhin, a Russian businessman, restaurateur, and former convict, has long been known to control the Wagner Group, but has historically sought to conceal this fact. Only after the invasion of Ukraine in 2022 did he publicly acknowledge his lead role within the organization. Although he does not hold any official government position, Prigozhin is understood to have a close personal relationship with Putin. He is described as a confidant, including in matters of state. Recently, Prigozhin has robustly criticized Defense Minister Shoigu and his military chief for, quote, incompetence and a lack of support for Wagner soldiers fighting in Bakhmut, Ukraine. This public criticism marks a shift, and there has been speculation that this indicates his relationship with President Putin is strained. However, we're cautious about speculation of this nature, as President Putin is known to tolerate rivalries within his inner circle. We are also tracking the Russian Ministry of Defense's statement this past weekend, which I'm sure members of the committee will have seen, regarding the requirement for volunteer formations in Ukraine to sign contracts with the Russian military. This appears to be an attempt to bring all so-called volunteer corps, including Wagner, under the Russian command and control structure. Prigozhin has publicly rejected this idea for Wagner. Mr. Chair, nothing about Wagner is straightforward. It is a private military company operating openly in St. Petersburg and Moscow, despite the fact that private military companies are illegal in Russia. It is a corporate enterprise, yet it is deeply enmeshed in Russian defense affairs and advances the Russian state's strategic objectives around the world. It is not part of the Russian military, yet it has been reported to train on a military base with Russian special forces. It has a founder who has denied his relationship with the company until he didn't. So what role does this group play? Generally, Russia uses the Wagner Group to advance its strategic interests where official Russian government intervention is perceived to be too costly or the risk of battlefield losses too great. These proxy forces serve as force multipliers. They help to expand the influence and financial gain of the Russian government and oligarchs in fragile and conflict-affected states, while obfuscating Russia's role in those conflicts and circumventing attribution through disinformation, deception, and propaganda.
Some examples of this group's activities. The Wagner Group has been active in Syria since 2014, supporting Russia's efforts in support of the Assad regime. In 2018, the Wagner Group entered into the Central African Republic, where it has played a major role in military operations against rebel groups since 2021. It is now integrated into the country's security and business environment and has even secured advisory roles with the president. In 2021, Mali's military junta hired Wagner to support military operations against Salafist jihadist militants. The group deployed between 1,000 and 1,500 personnel on site. The UK and the US have estimated that around 50,000 soldiers taking part in the fighting in Ukraine belong to the Wagner Group. The Wagner Group has played an increasingly visible role in this country as the war has progressed. The Wagner Group's actions in Ukraine, particularly in Bakhmut, have been particularly bloody and controversial. Wherever it operates, the Wagner Group is accused of human rights violations. Reports indicate that its troops have regularly targeted civilian populations and attacked them opportunistically, including by committing sexual violence and robbery. Marginalized groups are disproportionately targeted, thereby fueling suffering and increasing the risk of violent extremism and instability.
I have described the Wagner Group as a private military company. It is important to telescope out a little bit and situate this group within the broader context of private military and security companies, which are common and are contracted by a wide variety of actors for an equally wide variety of purposes, many of these very legitimate. States, including Canada, as well as international organizations such as the UN, contract private military and security companies to provide vital support along a continuum of security-related activities. This includes logistics, perimeter security, and close protection, to name a few. The UN, for example, uses such companies to provide security for UN staff, facilities, and convoys in conflict zones. The bottom line is that private security companies are not all created equal. The Wagner Group stands out due to its dubious legal status, its close affiliation with the Russian state, its record of supporting state-sponsored violence, its commission of human rights abuses, its malign influence activities, and the sheer number of countries in which it is present as a fighting force. Canada and international partners have responded accordingly. The US, the UK, and the European Council have all sanctioned the Wagner Group and Prigozhin personally. Canada has likewise sanctioned Wagner, as well as Prigozhin personally, in addition to 13 other individuals and 9 entities with links to the company. Mr. Chair, that brings me to the end of my statement. I welcome questions from the committee.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hulan. That was perfect in terms of timing. We just hit the 8-minute mark. So we will now open it to questions from the members. We first go to Mr. Jennis. Mr. Jennis, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the officials for being here and for your important work. On January the 30th, Parliament unanimously adopted a motion calling on the government to designate the Wagner Group as a terrorist organization. Does the government of Canada, did the government of Canada support that motion, or did they abstain on that motion?
I'm very sorry. It was a unanimous motion, you said?
Well, it was unanimous insofar as nobody voted, nobody spoke against it. So I'd like to know, in terms of the government's position on that, did they abstain or did they support?
On the substance of the question, should this entity be listed as a transnational terrorist entity, I would just note that those questions of listings under the criminal code fall under the Minister of Public Safety's responsibility. And if you have further questions on the substance of that, I'll be happy to pass those along. Thank you.
Substantively, my question was what the government of Canada's position is on whether the Wagner Group should be listed, and presumably your department advised the government in the preparation of that motion. It shouldn't be that complicated a question. What was the government's position on that motion? Did they support it or did they abstain from it?
Mr. Chair, the government is involved in an iterative and ongoing process related to the question of which entities to add to this list, and it does not disclose the specifics of those iterative discussions publicly.
Right. I'm familiar a little bit with this process because the House passed a motion calling on the government to list the IRGC as a terrorist organization 5 years ago, and we got a similar response, that there's a process of ongoing consideration. But at some point, after 5 years, it becomes obvious that the government has decided not to list and simply didn't want to admit as much. There have been cases where the government has moved very quickly on the listing of terrorist organizations. I can think of, for instance, the Proud Boys. Following a parliamentary motion, it was a number of it was, I think, a month or two after that the government proceeded with listing. So we know the process doesn't take that long. What should we read into the delay in the government listing? The Wagner Group has been active, of course, long before January 30th, but there was the January 30th motion in the House. There was the February 14th recommendation from this committee. What should we read into the government's delay in listing the Wagner Group as a terrorist organization?
Mr. Chairman, it's not for me to advise Parliament on what to read into the government's actions, but generally speaking, determining whether to designate an entity as a terrorist organization is the result of very rigorous and continual process based on evidence and intelligence and legal analysis. It must meet a specific legal threshold as laid out in subsection 83.05(1) of the Criminal Code, where there are reasonable grounds.
Sorry, ma'am, I understand the process, but what I'm trying to get an understanding of is simply what the government's position is on listing Wagner and why they've delayed. And I know that there's a process that's required, but I also know that process has unfolded very quickly in certain cases past, and there's been a ragging of the puck in other cases past. I'm not asking you to comment on the merits one way or the other of listing. I'm just asking what the government's position is. And it sounds from what you're saying that the government doesn't have a position on it. Is that, they haven't listed. You're not prepared to say whether the government supported the motion or not. Is it fair to conclude that the government simply does not have a position on listing Wagner Group one way or the other?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. The government does not comment publicly on ongoing investigations and consideration of whether to list an entity. For the government's position, the honourable member would need to ask a member of the government. Thank you.
Okay. I mean, I would love to have a minister testify as part of this study, but in the absence of a minister, I mean, I would think that officials, if there's a government position, you'd be able to tell us, and if there's not a government position, you're obviously in a difficult spot. I would just say, in terms of the government commenting publicly or not, I mean, the government chose to allow the passage of a unanimous consent motion on January 30th. We had a report of this committee, which includes members of the government caucus and parliamentary secretaries that supported a recommendation to list the Wagner Group. One final question, the time I have. Various other of our allies, I'm thinking of France, the UK, Lithuania, have designated the Wagner Group as a terrorist entity. Have you been in discussions with those countries about their experience listing the Wagner Group and the effect that it's had in terms of their engagement?
Thank you very much. In fact, the Americans have listed Wagner as a transnational criminal organization. On the question of this question, we are not in a position. We do not have the same mechanism in this country to
Sorry,
list
my
Wagner.
question was about the U.S. It was about France, the UK, and Lithuania, though. I didn't mention the U.S. in my question.
Turn to Madame Bendayan. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And it seems that there's some confusion on behalf of my Conservative colleague. There was a unanimous consent motion in the House with government members and certainly this government member in support of listing the Wagner Group as a terrorist organization. Just to perhaps continue on the train of thought of my colleague, I believe you mentioned it, Ms. Hulan, but the United States has listed the Wagner Group as a transnational criminal organization. And I was reading what some experts in the United States have been discussing about some of the issues that they are facing with listing the Wagner Group as a terrorist entity, with one expert noting that if they were to be listed as a terrorist group, that would mean that many states, predominantly African states, that do engage with Wagner could be criminally liable. Is that an issue that you can help us unpack, Ms. Hulan?
Yes. Terrorist activities fall outside of our normal treatment of government-sanctioned activities, activities undertaken as part of a state's military apparatus do not count as terrorist activities. If Wagner is operating in African countries and is designated as a terrorist entity, then in certain jurisdictions, I understand they could be held liable for Wagner's behavior. I would just defer to my colleague from the legal branch on the finer points of that. Thank you.
Thank you. With respect to your specific question regarding whether African states could then be held liable for, could be held responsible for Wagner's activities if indeed they were listed as a terrorist entity, I do believe that there would be challenges because, of course, dealing with a terrorist entity engages criminal liability. So in that case, yes, there would be the potential of criminal sanction for those kinds of activities on the part of African states.
Thank you. Earlier in your introduction, you referenced the important role that Wagner Group had in Bakhmut. Obviously, their takeover of the town was significant in it being one of the only Russian so-called successes of their war effort. I wonder if you can give us a sense if you expect the Wagner Group to continue operating in Ukraine as they have been, or perhaps to refocus their operations elsewhere, understand that the Wagner Group is said to have left Bakhmut and been replaced by regular Russian forces. I'd like to hear you on what information you may have.
Thank you. I can't speak to the presence of Wagner and exactly who they may have been replaced by, although we are tracking all of those kinds of questions. I would fully expect that Wagner would remain in Ukraine. They are a very important part of the Russian operations in that countries, Russia's illegal operations in that country, I would say. Moreover, despite the fact that Wagner has taken incredibly heavy losses, one estimate suggests that of the 50,000 troops it has deployed, it has lost 30 of those. I can't verify those numbers, but they're really testament to the fact that Wagner is willing to be present in the most dangerous and active fighting zones of Ukraine. And of course, their motive is not ideological, it is profit-based, and they are being paid for their activities in that country, which are substantial.
Perhaps in connection with that comment, I would point to the fact that Mr. Prigozhin explicitly called out Russian military leadership on various occasions. I wonder if, in your view, that shows some fragmentation in the Russian war effort, and if you feel that this might present a challenge to Putin's leadership in Russia.
Forgive me, to Putin's leadership in Russia? Okay, thank you. I'm sure everyone has seen the profanity-laced comments that have been made on video by Prigozhin, in which he has very, very harsh criticism of the defense minister, the chief of the Russian defense staff, etc. And what I think you can conclude from those comments is that there is not unity within the Russian presence in Ukraine. There is, at minimum, rivalry between some elements of the Russian military and Prigozhin and his private forces present in the country. Whether this has any impact on President Putin's stability and hold on power, it is very, very difficult to say. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, Putin does have a history of tolerating rivalries within his inner circle for reasons that I think we can speculate on, but perhaps best not to. Thanks.
Thank you. I understand that I only have a few moments remaining. I wonder if you could provide us with some sense of how effective our sanctions have been in this regard, and if you do not have time to provide a full answer, perhaps you can table with the committee some suggestions that we might pursue in order to strengthen our sanctions against Wagner Group individuals.
Very, very briefly, please.
I think our sanctions have had both direct and indirect impact, but I can particularly speak to the indirect impact of that, which is they are bleeding resources from the Russian military, which Wagner depends upon utterly for equipment and cash. Thank you.
Thank you. We now go to Madame Larouche. Vous avez 6 minutes.
You have 6 minutes, Madame Larouche. Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, I'd like to make a quick comment. We had an informal meeting this morning, and I think we need to review how we organise these informal committee meetings so they can be put on official footing with translation in French. That's how this type of meeting should take place. And I am in the Women's Committee where we formally have these translation services. And when we only have briefing notes in English as well, is something that is against our right as an MP to have it provided in the 2 official languages, and also as regards informal meetings and translation services. Having said that, I'd like the committee to ponder that, and I'd like to turn to the questions for the witnesses. We see that the emergence of the Wagner Group coincided with the annexation of Crimea by Russia in 2014. The group has become more and more prominent throughout the world since then. In particular, they have a position in the African continent. They are a paramilitary partner of choice for countries such as Syria, Libya, Mozambique, the Central African Republic and Mali, where these services are offered. in return for having privileged access to natural resources and commercial interests for Russian oligarch enterprises and Prigozhin enterprises. And Wagner's group is very much intertwined with Russian foreign policy, in particular in Middle East and Sub-Saharan Africa, and in the invasion in Ukraine. So I'd like to turn back to this question of sanctions. When did you impose sanctions on the Wagner Group? When? And if it was recently, why did you not do it as of 2014?
Thank you very much. I don't have the date right in front of me, but I will find it and share it with the committee. Thank you. Oh, sorry, are you able to? Thank you. I'll turn to Andrew Turner to answer that question. Thanks, Andrew.
We imposed sanctions against the Wagner Group on the 24th of February 2022 as a direct response to the invasion of Ukraine. And why did you not do that back in 2014 with everything that I've just cited? Given that the group emerged back then, why did you not impose these right away, given what this group was doing? The importance of the group and its profile in 2014 was not so high as is the case today. So when the invasion took place, we wanted to show our determination to put as severe economic pressure as a response to the invasion into Ukraine, and that was our reasoning for doing it then. So once again, whoever would like to respond, what are the sources of funding for the Wagner Group? It seems that Zena Books, Alexander, we have heard that Wagner's started exploiting mines in Central Africa Republic, which is a branch of a Canadian mining company. So what's your reaction when this type of maneuver takes place and when we use these Canadian mining companies in this way?
Thank you. Wagner has many sources of financing. They are understood to be financed from within Prigozhin's own network of companies and his vast corporate empire. Generally, they receive direct payments, and they're also known to receive payments in kind through natural resources concessions. I'd like to turn to Marcel Lebleu to answer more specifically about their African engagement. Thank you.
Yes, Chair. The Wagner Group is indeed present in the Central African Republic and also in Mali. And the so-called business model varies from one country to another. In the Central African Republic, what the MP has said is well-founded. A concession has been granted, a mining concession has been given to Wagner, which belonged to Axmin, which is a Canadian-listed company. We confiscated that property back in 2019. When I said we confiscated it, I'm referring to the Central African Republic government. And the company went into mediation and in February 2023 announced that it was going to international arbitration for losses and damages as a result of this conflict between a private company and the state. And in the Central African Republic, we've got a clear model. The Wagner Group runs itself this mine. With Mali, it's a service contract from what we've heard. So a service contract of a conventional type, where the government pays around $10 million per month to Wagner to offer services of about 1,000 mercenaries who are based in Mali, and they work side by side with the Malian armed forces. So a follow-up. What are your discussions with Central African Republic and Mali about the presence of Wagner? You've referred to arbitration between companies, but what about your direct links with these two countries? Well, in the case of Mali, this is government that has arisen as a result of military coup d'etat in 2021, and we've expressed our concerns about this publicly. And once again, when we had the first confirmation of the presence of the Wagner Group in Mali with 15 allied countries, we came out with a statement to express our deep concerns about their presence in this country. And to continue in that vein, there are certain cases of human rights abuses that have been documented, and crimes such as the Mura massacre, where the UN published a report about a month ago, which reported on the killings, the massacres of 500 Malian civilians by the Malian armed forces and the use of sexual violence. There were 50 cases of rape that were documented, and we're asking the Malian government to report on this. And there was a joint declaration with the US and the UK where we expressed once again our concerns and asked the Malian government to confirm and help with the pursuit of this case.
6-minute round. We now go to Ms. McPherson.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and also thank you very much for being here and sharing your expertise with us. Mr. LeBleu, that's very interesting testimony that you've just provided with regards to Canadian companies using the Wagner Group. Can you give us a bit of a sense on how many Canadian companies are implicated in perhaps working with the Wagner Group, if they are all within the extractive industries, and would there be then a role for the Canadian government, perhaps through the Corps, perhaps through the National Contact Point, to deal with these infractions, I would call them?
Bien sûr, Monsieur.
Yes, of course, Chair. As far as we know, we've only documented one single case. It was Axmine, which does not cooperate with Wagner. Rather, it's a company where the license was confiscated by the Central African government. In Mali, we haven't seen any case of cooperation between the private Canadian sector, where we've got important investments in mining. We have big mining companies that are present in the gold mining sector, and we work closely with our Canadian companies, not just with the Ombudsman Person's Office, but we also work on the basis of voluntary principles for peace and security, and we do that type of training with our companies. And Canada is also a member of the Transparency Initiative in the extractive sector. And I think that's what is most important for us in terms of our Trade Commissioner services is that we ask the companies to make a statement of integrity in order to obtain services from the Canadian government. So this statement means that they have to commit to a certain conduct, certain behaviour, and we explicitly ask them to declare that that this company has no relationship with any corruption files or diversion of funds or any other legal disputes with countries.
And obviously that doesn't always work. You know, we've seen that Canadian companies have committed pretty horrific atrocities around the world, have not been held to account in any meaningful way. You spoke about Mali, so I assume what you're saying, though, is that there is no examples except from within what you've mentioned where Canadian mining companies are involved, extractive companies are involved. Okay. The other thing that we've been talking a lot about is, you know, Mali, the CAR, but we also know that, or I think that the Wagner Group's been quite heavily implicated in what's happening in Sudan, certainly in South America. We have heard that there is an African strategy that may or may not be an African framework that may or may not be coming. Can you talk to us, perhaps, Ms. Hulen, about how the Wagner Group where that stands with that? How is that going to be incorporated into that strategy or framework?
I would, on the idea of an African strategy and where this fits in, I'll defer to Marcel, but on the general issue of how their presence around the world feeds multiple objectives, it is very clear that Wagner is heavily, heavily invested in Africa. It is also present in Latin America, particularly in Venezuela, we understand. But the African presence is really notable. And as I said in my opening remarks, but I'll expand on here, it serves as a force multiplier for Russian diplomacy, which is very active on the African continent in an attempt to split the African continent from countries like Canada on issues like Ukraine. And on the question of the Africa strategy, I'm conscious time is tight.
I'm just going to
Marcel.
really quickly
Yeah.
jump in really fast before I go to the African framework or strategy. You just talked a little bit about the absence that they're using it as a diplomatic tool. So of course that's vital that Canada is there present on the ground as well, and I'm not sure that we are as much as we should be. But you also talked in your testimony about the idea that this group is not ideological, that they are profit driven. Are they not also ideologically driven though, especially if you're talking about them having a role with regards to diplomacy, having a role with spreading Russian ideology around the world?
I believe no. I believe that it is non-ideological as an effort. What we know is that there is a close relationship with the president of the Russian Federation and the head of Wagner, but the driver is profit motive, and in the sense that their profit also serves to amplify Russian diplomacy, they're involved. But we see this as really a corporate enterprise.
Thank you. And on the Africa strategy, please.
Oui, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, Mr. Chair. To respond specifically to that question, the government about 10 days ago launched consultations for the economic cooperation strategy with Africa, and this strategy was part of the mandate letter from Minister Ng from the Prime Minister, and the department is going to implement this strategy. As I've said, we've launched consultations. The portal was opened about 10 days ago, and we will continue with the consultations over the summer.
Through the trade arm of foreign affairs, not through development, not incorporating aspects of development, diplomacy, and trade? Is it predominantly being done through trade?
No.
Yes, but this is we have three ministers, and obviously some of the component are actually we use it. We incorporated the development pillar and also the political pillar. Development pillar, for example, is going to be. Mr. President. Okay.
Maybe another 10 seconds at best. You will have the opportunity to answer
sure. Okay.
more questions as we move forward. So next we go to Mr. Epp. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the officials. I'm going to pick up on a question, Mr. Lemieux, that you responded to my colleague, Ms. McPherson. Can you confirm then if and when, hopefully, that Wagner is designated as a terrorist group, that any cooperation with Canadian companies will be, that automatically shuts down any cooperation, any relationship?
Just look, our existing sanctions impose a prohibition on dealings with Wagner already. It is already impermissible for a Canadian company, either here inside the territory of Canada or internationally, to deal with Wagner under our existing sanctions. Thank you.
Is Wagner Group listed as a legal entity within Russia, within the Russian legal framework, or is it just a scattering, that's probably the wrong terminology, of companies controlled by Prigozhin?
I'll turn to my colleague from the legal department on that, but just to say, Wagner is Prigozhin's military entity. It's his military company. He has numerous other companies named different things for different purposes. So Wagner refers specifically to this military operation, and if you do.
Which is illegal. Private army is illegal under Russian law, is it not?
It is. And I am not aware of any incorporation as a private military company in Russia, because it is illegal to have a private military corporation in Russia.
A number of us this morning were on a call with Latvia, and Latvia, the representatives there, the ambassadors, identified that they too have listed the Wagner Group as a terrorist entity. So I'm going to, that can be added to France, the UK, Lithuania. So how are those countries different than Canada in their ability to relatively swiftly list Wagner as a terrorist entity?
Mr. Chair, This is an issue that I would like us to come back to the committee in writing on. I am not aware of formal designations as terrorist entities. I am aware that the French Parliament has passed a non-binding resolution calling on the European Union to formally label Wagner as a terror group, but the EU has not taken that step. But, Mr. Chair, I will, be very candid and say that I would like to go and look at the specifics and respond to this specific question in writing. Thank you.
Thank you for that explanation, Ms. Hulan. I would just like to add to that yes, during the course of our meeting today, we were informed by our Latvian friends that they are recommending to the EU that it be listed, and that, to your point, it was not a binding parliamentary resolution. Mr. Epp.
The existing or the legal frameworks for designating Wagner as a terrorist, they do exist here in Canada. So are there any errors or omissions, holes in that list in that framework that you would find more useful and more speedily responding to quite frankly, the pressure to have them listed? And I guess this afternoon we'll be debating S8 at third reading. This committee studied, some updated legislation that links admissibility and our sanctions regime. Is there something missing in our terrorist designation legal frameworks that would allow for speedier responses?
Mr. Chair, I believe the Government of Canada has all of the legal tools it requires to list individuals and entities under the terror designation. Thank you.
For the next slot, we go to MP Zuberi. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. We've been speaking about terror entities and listings and how do groups get onto a terror list. You said that in Canada we have the Criminal Code, which actually, I believe, if I noted it correctly, Section 83.51 is the mechanism, the piece of legislation we use to list terror organizations, and that is housed under public safety, correct?
That is correct. That is
and for the European Union, for a member state to have a group listed as a terror organization, it is done at the instance of the European Union. Is that correct?
That is my understanding. I'd like our legal colleagues to add to that.
Sorry, at this point, I wouldn't be able to add to that, but that can form part of the response that we provide to the additional questions that were requested earlier.
That's helpful. And from my understanding, for a state like Latvia or other member state of the EU, for them to actually have an organization listed as a terror organization is done at the instance of the European Union, at which point the member states then implement the application of a group and the ramifications of it being a terror entity within their jurisdiction.
Mr. Chair, that is my understanding. All sanctions in the European Union are done within states to the European, are done through the European Union and then implemented by the members of the European Union. Thank you.
We spoke a bit about America and what it's done and how it's listed Wagner as a transnational criminal organization, which is, in my understanding, similar to what America does for Mexican cartels. It's an in-between sort of space from what we have in the Criminal Code, 83.51, and sanctions, let's say. My colleague, Mr. Epp, asked if there are other devices you can suggest that might not be on the books right now while our legislation is robust and does meet the moment and takes care of organizations that they should be taken care of. Do you have any suggestions around what we can do in addition to what we have right now, despite the fact we do have quite good legislation?
Mr. Chair, I won't comment for the government on what additional measures it may wish to pursue in this domain. From the perspective of the civil service, we have all the tools at our disposal that are required in order to list individuals and entities when needed. Thank you. I would add to that, the Americans have a tool in their toolbox that we don't have in our toolbox, namely presidential orders, right? And so in Canada, we pursue such listings through existing legislation and listings under existing legislation, but presidential orders is not a tool available in Canada.
In the 30 seconds that's left, if you want to outline a bit more what's happening in Syria, Libya, Mozambique, Central African Republic, Mali with Wagner, what they're doing, human rights abuses.
Less than 15 seconds.
Yeah, Canada is committed to these countries. We have a long-standing relation with these countries, especially Mali. We've been involved for 60 years. We have, to be honest, reviewed some of our development program. For example, when there was a coup, we suspended all direct budget support. We're adapting this to this new reality, but we will keep supporting the people most in need of humanitarian assistance. So,
Thank you, Mr. LeBlanc. We're going to have to go to the next member. Madame Larouche, vous avez 2 minutes.
You have 2 minutes, Madame Larouche. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to come back to Canadian policy in Africa, because we know that Canada, on several occasions, said that it's like the Indo-Pacific region has said it wants to extend its presence also in Africa, but we know that the government is lagging in this file. It's very vague in terms of Canada's action in Africa, and we also know that there's this increasing influence, as you've explained from the outset, of China and Russia on the continent, and we're looking at the increasing geographical presence of Wagner in Africa and Libya, in the CAR, Mali and Sudan, and often this links up with the objectives of the Russian state. That's part of their plan, and they want to gain influence in the region. So why are we waiting before we get more interested in Africa? And we see the influence of Russia on the economic stability of these countries. Is Canada actually assessing its international assistance programs in countries such as Mali, where the Wagner Group is present, to take account of this new reality? We're a bit afraid that perhaps our assistance to these countries could fall into the wrong hands. That's what we're fearful about. So have you made changes? And if you've not made changes, why not? Yes, to answer very briefly, I'll try and start to answer. When there was the first coup d'etat, our standard practice in the government with African countries and in other continents, we suspend direct budgetary assistance. So no resources are sent directly to these governments. And I can guarantee that 100% of our development programs today ensure that the funds are transferred to Canadian civil society or recognized partners such as humanitarian aid with the World Food Programme, UNICEF, and so on. So there are no resources that are transferred directly towards the Malian state.
Very much, Mr. LeBlanc. We go to Madam McPherson. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This has been very interesting. Thank you for all of the information that you're sharing with us. Just very quickly on the sanctions and the Wagner Group, do you have any concerns that there are Canadians that have assets that are associated with, or that there are any Canadian assets that are associated with the Wagner Group in Canada still that have not been sanctioned?
I'm not aware of any Canadian assets or people with Canadians with assets tied up in Wagner. I would ask if my colleague Andrew would like to add to that answer.
I'm not aware either, but I would note that we are working with all of the various investigative agencies, the RCMP, to thoroughly look into any possibilities. And as noted, because of the sanctions that we have imposed, any such assets or financial dealings with Wagner or Wagner-related entities would be subject to criminal sanction.
Of course, the challenges that we have is that I'm not confident that our sanctions are being enforced as well as they could be. Obviously, we have limited resources compared to what other countries have associated with their sanctions. I do want to go back, Ms. Hulan, to some of the things that you were saying about the not being ideological, and I think that's, I mean, obviously, the profit motive is something that, from your perspective, is their key motivator, but they do, the Wagner Group does have extremist right-wing views, from my understanding, and that does color their work to some degree. Could you tell us a little bit about the framework in which those right-wing views are being shown, being expressed, how it could, in fact, influence some of their decision-making as a military?
Seconds.
Very briefly, yes, some of the Wagner is known to have a number of actors within it that have links to extremist and far-right ideologies. There's no question about the personal inclinations of some of the members, including its military commander, Utkin, who's a former Russian military officer who now retired and runs the military operations of Wagner. In fact, his nom de guerre was Wagner. And his nom de guerre was Wagner because Wagner was Hitler's favorite composer.
Thank you, Ms. Hulan. We're going to have to move
Thank
on. My apologies for that. We now go to Mr. Jennis. Mr. Jennis, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I do want to just clarify my earlier questions, because the legal frameworks between different countries are not identical when it comes to terrorist designation or anti-terrorism law. I'm aware of the U.S. situation. A number of countries in Europe have, in effect, designated Wagner as a terrorist organization through a parliamentary motion, but that does not have the same legal effect as a designation does in Canada. And the UK is being widely reported as developing a legal case and on the verge of making a terrorist designation, which in the UK, from what I understand, would be relatively similar in its legal effects to the Canadian experience. My question, though, was mainly just about our engagement with those other players and whether we're having conversations with our allies about the fact that they view Wagner as a terrorist organization and how our approach should line up with theirs. So could you just update the committee on any discussions that are happening with the UK, with the US, with other allies on how we might take a coordinated approach to recognizing as terrorist or otherwise the nature of the violence that the Wagner Group is responsible for?
So I'm in regular contact with the UK and the US on a wide variety of issues, particularly pertaining to the conduct of the conflict in Ukraine. And we are overwhelmingly preoccupied with responding to the effects, Mr. Chair, of
Sorry, I'm very
Wagner's
tight for time. I
engagement.
got 3 minutes. So on Wagner specifically.
So we have discussed Wagner. I would say I can tell the committee that none of those colleagues have raised with me any intention to list Wagner as a terrorist entity.
That includes the UK?
That includes the UK.
Okay, that's striking because it's been widely reported that they are on the verge of that. So that's interesting information. Thank you. I'm also a bit perplexed about you saying, kind of on the one hand, we have all of the tools that we need in order to respond, but on the other hand, saying we haven't used the existing tool we have yet, or the U.S. has a tool that we don't have. So, is the issue with responding to Wagner that the tool doesn't, the tool you think would be optimal doesn't exist? If the tool does exist, we should use it, and if the tool doesn't exist, then you should tell us that as parliamentarians so that we can propose the new tool. So do we have the tools we need, or do we not? And if we do have the tools we need, then why the delay, I guess?
Mr. Chair, I believe I've answered this question already. The government has the tools it needs to make terrorist designations. Those terrorist designations result from internal and iterative deliberations. I'll finish, Mr. Chair, in a second. And the government does not comment publicly on the nature of those ongoing discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. For the final question, we go to Mr. Oliphant. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. And I just want to thank you for your work on this, but also give you time to finish your thoughts on those questions. I think what our committee is wrestling with is the effectiveness of sanctions and the importance of sanctions and the difference between sanctions and listing and the different processes. One is a set of laws we have under sanctions, and another is a criminal code listing designation as a terrorist organization. And I think we all agree at this point that Wagner is an organization whose means are malicious, whose goals are malicious, and Canada is looking for ways to stop that. So I just want to and give you a chance also to talk about the difference between our regimes and other countries, which are long established. I want you to take the time to help us know. I'm not trying to score points here. I'm trying to get answers.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I know you're at the beginning of your deliberations on this issue, and we will be happy either in writing or in person to continue to support the committee in your deliberations. This is a very, very important file. Look, with respect to terrorist designations and sanctions, we care about this from two particular respects. One is effect. What kind of effect can you have with sanctions and various designations? And from an effect perspective, our existing sanctions, I would say, provide substantially the same effect as listings as a terrorist entity. It's in effect a dealings ban, a very important effect. Second, from the perspective of accountability and justice, particularly for Ukraine in this context, there is a question about whether, better served by a designation or by treating Wagner as part of the Russian state apparatus under international law. And here I would just say, Mr. Chair, that while we can list, one thing to consider is that a listing as a terrorist entity may make it more difficult to associate the actions and activities of Wagner on the ground in Ukraine with the Russian state. And if we have difficulty associating the actions of Wagner with the Russian state, it will be more difficult to hold President Putin accountable for those atrocities. And so that sounds like a leading statement. It does not indicate the state of any discussions within the Government of Canada, except it is a real consideration for the committee to make note of as you consider your own findings in this area. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hulan. That concludes our first hour dedicated to a study of the Wagner Group. We're very, very grateful to Ms. Netley, Mr. Lebleu, Madame Hulan, and Mr. Turner. We're grateful for your time and for your expertise. You have certainly provided us ample context for us to revisit this study in the coming months. Very grateful indeed. We now suspend for no more than 2 minutes to allow the witnesses to leave and our next witness to appear. Yeah. Welcome back, everyone. Now, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, January 31st, 2022, our committee resumes its study of the situation at the Russia-Ukraine border and implications for peace and security. And for that purpose, we are very, very honored to have with us a special witness today from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Lithuania. We are honored to have the Vice Minister, Mr. Meilunash. Now, as members are fully aware, we have a very, very special relationship with Lithuania. Lithuania will also be hosting the next NATO summit. But it is a country with which we have had excellent relations, starting from the Soviet occupation of Lithuania. We were one of the few countries that never actually accepted the annexation of Lithuania. And over the past year, we have had ample opportunities to work very, very closely with each other. Mr. Meilunash, we're very grateful you made the time to appear before the committee. For your opening remarks, you will be provided 7 minutes, after which we will open it to questions from the members. One last thing I did want to tell you, Mr. Meilunash, is you have an extraordinary ambassador here in Ottawa who is well known to most of the members here. So you will be happy to know that we are quite conversant on many of the issues that both our countries are grappling with. That having been said, again, thank you for being with us, and you have 7 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, dear colleagues. First of all, thank you for your invitation. It's really a great honor for me to be with you today. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for your very kind introduction and remarks on our bilateral cooperation. We Lithuanians, we value Canada as a great friend of Lithuania. Thank you for your support. Invaluable support for our independence, for our security. We value you also as a like-minded country with which we have really excellent cooperation in many fields. We also are proud of Lithuanian community in Canada, which greatly contributes to our cooperation and strengthens our friendship. We highly value your great contribution to Baltic states, including Lithuania's security. Actually, security and defense are among these areas we would like to even expand and deepen cooperation with Canada. And also let me express our appreciation for your strong support and development contribution for Ukraine. Your Prime Minister's visit last Saturday to Kiev was a great symbol of Canada's unwavering support to Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, in 4 weeks we will host NATO summit in Vilnius. So I would like to share some thoughts, some views with you on what we have to achieve, all allies, and to discuss the summit. First of all, the alliance must substantially strengthen deterrence and forward defense in eastern flank. Last year in Madrid, the allies very clearly stated that, I quote, "The Russian Federation is the most significant and direct threat to allies' security and to peace and stability in the Euro-Atlantic area." Security reality after February 24th last year demanded a fundamental rethinking of NATO's deterrence and defense posture from tripwire strategy to denial for any adversary and any opportunity of attack. In order to substantially strengthen NATO's deterrence and forward defenses, the allies in Madrid, I quote, "have committed to deploy additional robust in place combat-ready forces on our eastern flank to be scaled up from the existing battle groups to brigade-size units where and when required. We are very grateful to all allies, in particular our enhanced forward presence framework and contributing nations, including Canada, who demonstrated commitment to collective defense by sending additional capabilities to our region. However, our alliance has to do more in order to be ready for any, including of no-notice scenario. In the foreseen future, Russia will remain the most significant and direct threat to NATO, to our alliance. Russia is not giving up its aggressive stance towards neighbors and the West. Just an example. This January, Russia announced that over the next 3 years, it plans to increase manpower of the army by 40%, up to 1.5 million, create a new army corps, and upgrade 7 brigades into motorized infantry divisions. Russia-Belarus political and military integration is a fait accompli. Belarus is permanently stationing Russian troops and is complicit in aggression against Ukraine. A recently signed agreement between Russia and Belarus on the deployment of nuclear arms in the territory of Belarus also calls for strengthening of our posture in all domains. These facts increase further the strategic importance of so-called Suwalki Gap that connects Baltic states with the rest of NATO and clearly demonstrates the need of functioning forward defense. Enhanced air and missiles defense posture, prepositioning of stocks, ammunition and equipment, and persistent presence of additional robust in-place combat-ready brigade-sized forces would signal firm readiness to defend every inch of the Allied territory at all times. In this regard, taking this opportunity, I would like to briefly inform of our national commitments. We remain steadfast in continuing with high defense spending, 2.52% of GDP, increased investments into military infrastructure, armed forces modernization, and scaling up to the level of national military forces to the level of division. Second, in Vilnius, we have to find a way to anchor Ukraine to the Euro-Atlantic Security Order. Article 10 of the Washington Treaty refers to one main criteria for NATO membership: the ability of the state to contribute to the security of Euro-Atlantic area. Ukraine has already proved that it's capable to fight against Russia, which is the most significant and direct threat to Euro-Atlantic community. Independent, democratic, and strong Ukraine, as a full-pledged member of NATO, is vital to our security and stability. Therefore, in Vilnius, we have to confirm that Ukraine will become a member of NATO and set a clear pathway for Ukraine's membership in NATO. We also have to expand and deepen existing NATO-Ukraine cooperation and to confirm that we will continue to support Ukraine as long and as much as needed. Very briefly on two other important topics in Vilnius. If we want to achieve our strategic goals, we have to agree on adequate defense funding, to discuss defense investment pledge renewal and setting 2% of GDP as minimum. And secondly, NATO AP for Indo-Pacific cooperation. As Jens Stoltenberg, NATO's Secretary General, stated in Japan in January this year, transatlantic and Indo-Pacific security is deeply interconnected. I even would say indivisible. At Vilnius Summit, we must strengthen partnership with our Indo-Pacific partners to increase our resilience, security supply chains, counter hybrid and cyber threats from the increasingly malign authoritarian countries. Ladies and gentlemen, and in the end, very briefly on accountability. One of the reasons why Russia is behaving so brutally in Ukraine, killing innocent people, including children, destroying, demolishing cities, villages, why they are so increasingly aggressive towards us, one of the reasons is that Russia has never been brought to justice and punished for its terrible crimes against other nations. So feeling of impunity is let them think that they are free to do what they want. We have to change this to bring Russia for its crimes, war crimes in Ukraine to justice. In this regard, ICC will play crucial role, but we also have to establish a special tribunal for Russia's crime on aggression. And in this regard, listening to your discussions on Wagner Group, I would like to inform you about one document approved by our parliament, Lithuanian parliament, this year on March 14th, namely the resolution on designating the private military company Wagner as terrorist organization. And I would like to quote two sentences from this document. First, Lithuanian Parliament notes that the Russian Federation's private military company Wagner is a terrorist organization and that its members and mercenaries pose a threat to state and public security. And second, Lithuanian Parliament calls on other states to recognize the Russian Federation private military company Wagner as a terrorist organization. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Vice Minister Mylunash. We now open it to questions. Yes.
I'm wondering with the other study, if we could have that, what he just put on the list, brought into that study, what we talked about in the first
Brought
one.
into?
The Wagner study?
Yes, we could do that, but we
that?
haven't really gotten started. There's nothing to...
Yeah. You agree?
Yes.
Okay. I think that'd be helpful.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Hoback, you have 4 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Chair. And Vice Minister, it's great to have you here, and I really appreciate you taking the time and the effort to show up in person and give us your insight into how the war is affecting your country and the region. I guess you're right on the border with Belarus. I'm just kind of curious, how is your relationship with Belarus? You probably at one time did a lot of trade into the Belarus-Russian corridor. How have you changed those trade patterns? You've sacrificed a lot, so I'm just kind of curious the impact that has been. And then, I guess I only get 4 minutes. Maybe my last question might be is, where could Canada shore up any weaknesses? Where could we assist you in making sure that you've got what you require to take on, whether it's refugees or whether it's the people that are leaving and fleeing Russia because they don't want to be drafted? Just kind of what you're doing in those areas too.
Thank you very much for your questions. First of all, speaking about our economic cooperation with Belarus, some time ago, 10, 15 years ago, it was quite an important economic partner for Lithuania. But right now we have very limited economic relations because of mainly two reasons. Lithuanian business people's assessment is that Belarus is not a reliable partner, and second, because of the aggressive stance against Lithuania and other neighboring countries. We also 2 years ago introduced sanctions against Belarusian regime. We stopped transit, for example, of Belarusian potash fertilizers through Lithuanian seaport. So, summarizing now, these economic relations are very, very limited. And could you please repeat your second question?
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious, with that stopping of that relationship with Belarus, how have you been able to find other markets or other suppliers into your economy? And I guess my second part of that question is, how are you handling refugees coming in from Ukraine or defectors coming in from Russia? There's a lot of young men that do not believe in this war and that do not want to be part of it. So, are they coming through the Belarus into Lithuania? Or are you experiencing any of those types of situations?
Yes, thank you very much.
We have a minute to answer both those questions, because then we have to turn to the other members.
So, very briefly, we host thousands of Belarus and Russian opposition leaders in Lithuania. So that is my answer to the second part of your question. And speaking about diversification, new partners, so I just would like to give you two statistic numbers from our foreign trade last year. With regard to Lithuanian origin goods export, more than 84% we exported to like-minded countries and only 1.2% to such autocratic regimes like Belarus, Russia, and China. So my answer is strategic diversification and enhanced cooperation with like-minded countries.
Thank you. We now go to MP Sarai. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Vice Minister. Vice Minister, can you shed some light as being your particular location in the region and your past, I guess you have better intel with regards to Russia and paramilitary forces in Russia, the Wagner Group's strength and weakness in the current Ukraine involvement. We've been talking about that now. Would be nice to know from your perspective on seeing the discontent that we publicly see between the defense minister of Russia and the Wagner Group, and is that real? And is there a retreat or of the Wagner Group from the front lines, or are they just repositioning?
Thank you very much for your question. It's not an easy task to comment on what is happening right now in Russia. Are those public disagreements real or not? But as I mentioned in my introductory remarks, the most important thing is what Russians are really their real intentions. So, as I mentioned, they already publicly announced on their plans to increase and scale up the existing military formations in the next 3 years. The rhetoric, the behavior is becoming more and more aggressive, not only against Ukraine and other neighbors, but also members of Euro-Atlantic community, and that is in near future key challenge for all of us, how to tackle with this new situation, new security situation in our region.
So when you say Russia is going to be ramping up over 40% increases or targeting 40% increases, do you think with the sanctions, the global sanctions, and the losses there or the challenges they're facing in Ukraine, they'll physically be able to meet those financially and or physical bodies? I guess physical bodies they'll just forcefully can recruit, but are they financially capable of increasing their military might by 40%?
Question to the point, I fully subscribe to what you said, that sanctions and losses in Ukraine substantially weakened Russian armed forces and their capability to continue the aggression, but we have to be aware that Russia is autocratic, imperialistic, chauvinistic, I could say in this way, country, which at this time, unfortunately, didn't change its behavior and its intentions against, as I mentioned, neighboring countries and NATO. So Yes, sanctions are quite effective, but still not enough to fully prevent them from producing missiles. I believe we have all like-minded countries, allies, to work harder in this regard to introduce new sanctions, preventing the war machine for further attacks against Ukraine and against us. Yes. Here I stop.
Very much, Vice Minister. We next go to Madame LaRouche. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, Vice Minister, for being with us today. Over and above Belarus, Lithuania also has borders with the exclave of Kaliningrad. So how is the European Union and Lithuania deciding to apply sanctions in this territory of Kaliningrad? And what are the main challenges for applying sanctions to Kaliningrad? And the military position of Russia in Kaliningrad, has it changed a lot since the 24th of February 2022?
Thank you. Again, very good question. First, regarding military situation, Kaliningrad, despite Russian losses in Ukraine, remains highly militarized region, which poses threat to neighboring countries and the whole Baltic Sea region. Now, speaking about, probably you had in mind transit to Kaliningrad. That is trilateral agreement from 2004, before our membership, as a part of our membership accession talks. European Union, Lithuania, and Russia Federation at that time agreed to allow passengers and goods transit from mainland Russia to Kaliningrad through Lithuania's territory on certain conditions. When Russia started war of aggression against Ukraine, many, according to EU sanctions regimes, many Russian goods were sanctioned. So, in agreement with European Union, we allow only very limited quantities of goods to be sent via Lithuania's territory to Kaliningrad, mainly because of humanitarian needs for Kaliningrad people.
Thank you. I know that you've talked about the 2% of the GDP invested in defence. Now, how much of the GDP in Lithuania is used for defence? And should all countries in NATO try and reach the 2% target?
Thank you for your question. As I mentioned, Lithuania now spends 2.52% of GDP for military defense purposes. There are discussions in our country speaking about future on possibility even to increase, maybe up to 3%. And in addition to that, as I mentioned, our government approved 3 years plan additional to that 2.52% budget, additional money to improve military infrastructure by building new barracks, new polygons for soldiers.
We now go to Madam McPherson. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for being here, Vice Minister. And I wanted to just take a moment to say thank you for having such a wonderful ambassador. He took the time to visit me in my constituency in Edmonton. Edmonton, of course, has a significant Lithuanian population, so it was lovely to be able to spend some time with him there. I think all of us are trying to figure out what we can do to support Lithuania, to support Ukraine, to push back against the imperialism that Russia has brought forward. And obviously, we're appalled by the recent attack on the dam and the increasing threat that the Russians seem to be bringing forward with regards to using nuclear weapons. Can you talk about the increase in those sorts of attacks, those sorts of threats, and what as Canadian parliamentarians, we should take from that?
As we witnessed probably every day during this Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, their main target is civilian population of Ukraine, their civilian infrastructure, and by killing innocent people, by destroying cities, shelling villages. You mentioned this attack against Novokakhovka Dam. It's a blatant violation of all international conventions, all international agreements. So that's why we are strongly supporting this idea of establishing this special international tribunal for Russia's crime of aggression. So, of course, ICC, International Criminal Court, will play a crucial role in bringing Russia to justice and punishing for other war crimes, but crime of genocide needs our additional efforts and attention.
Thank you. I did look at some of the documents that have been brought forward and some of the goals that you have or your country has for the NATO summit. And one of them is, and I'll just quote, to expand and strengthen practical cooperation between NATO and its Indo-Pacific partner countries, including in the areas of technology, cyber defense, and resilience to hybrid threats, and the pursuit of the rules-based international order. Now, we've seen China, perhaps not explicitly, but implicitly supporting Russia during this illegal war. Do you worry that there could be implications with regards to China by having this as one of your stated goals for the Vilnius summit?
First of all, we have to very clearly state and send strong message. We already sent it, but to send it again to China that military support to Russia, that is red line. And in such case, be prepared for sanctions or other consequences for China. So that is first. But we also, as I quoted what NATO Secretary General said about the indivisibility, links between Euro-Atlantic area and Indo-Pacific security, so we also have to send very strong message to PRC, to China, that peace and stability in Taiwan Strait, that is also red line that China it's red line for China.
Now for the second round, each member gets 3 minutes, and we first go to MP Epp. 3 minutes.
Chair, and thank you, Mr. Vice Minister, for joining us today. You mentioned in your opening comments that you had blocked Belarusian potash shipments through your country to port. Thank you. You are providing impetus for my farm to find Saskatchewan potash and more efficient ways of getting it there. So we very much support that. Picking up on MP McPherson's comments, questions are regarding nuclear weapons. Russia has stated, in quotes, they're storing them in Belarus. I suspect that that is not a storage issue from a Lithuanian perspective.
Thank you. Thank you very much. But first of all, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that Russians, they are masters in creating false reality and threatening us, Western community, neighbors. So our assessment is that this Russian-Belarusian agreement on deployment of nuclear weapons in Belarus, first of all, is an attempt to again threaten us, threaten Lithuania, threaten Baltic states, and NATO as defense alliance, So that is our assessment, and our response should be, as I already mentioned in my introductory remarks, enhancement of NATO eastern flank and a very clear demonstration of our unity and solidarity.
Thank you. You also stated that you've added your voice to other EU countries in recommending that the Wagner Group be listed as a terrorist organization. Do you expect that role that to come quickly with the EU as a designation? And secondly, what is the major benefit from having that occur?
Actually, our parliament called not only on other EU states but on all states globally to recognize the Russian Federation private military company Wagner as a terrorist organization. So that is first point. And second, speaking about future next steps, our parliament also, I would quote, stresses the need for Lithuania to adopt a law on prevention of terrorism, laying down specific criteria for the approval of a list of terrorist organizations by the government of the Republic of Lithuania or an institution authorized by it, and for the imposition of statutory sanctions against persons participating in activities of terrorist organizations, including on that list.
Thank you very much. We now go to MP Oliphant. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Minister. Can you just explain to me what sanctions Lithuania has against the Wagner Group? You've talked about listing, but have you got a regime of sanctions against the Wagner Group and its leader as well?
Thank you. As I mentioned, now we are working on this law on the prevention of terrorism.
But have you sanctioned the group?
At this time, we have no national legal framework for doing that.
I just wanted to try to get that on the record. You're
Yeah.
calling on us to list them, but we've already sanctioned them and have strong sanctions against both the leader, the owner, as well as the group. I just wanted to make sure that was clear, that we have different regimes, but we've already acted as strongly as any other country has on the Wagner Group. Doesn't mean we don't consider other actions, but I wanted to do that. I wanted to ask a little bit about Kaliningrad. I won't get into the naming issue and what Poland wants to call it or what Germany used to call it. What is its strategic significance for Russia, and what is its threat to the Baltics?
For Russia, Kaliningrad region and Kaliningrad port is of strategic importance. It right now remains the only one port in Baltic Sea, and with NATO, with Sweden's and Finland's accession to NATO, Baltic Sea region, Baltic Sea becomes, as some experts say, internal NATO sea. So actually aggressive Russia's behavior against us, against NATO community, poses a fundamental threat to whole Baltic Sea region and its member states.
Wanted to get that in there because we've not really talked about it in our committee before, and because it borders on you. We got Belarus, you've got Kaliningrad right there. It would be thing. The last thing would be with respect to Ukraine's NATO membership. I assume you know, but Canada was the first country to call for Ukraine's membership in NATO 15 years ago, using the open door policy. We've reiterated it several times, recognizing that what we've done in the last 15 years is build capacity through training military, through transparency and anti-corruption measures, building democracy, to get them ready. Very different from Sweden and Finland in terms of their democracy and military capacity and readiness for fast tracking. But Canada is extremely supportive and has been for 15 years. So just wanted to make sure you knew that we will be on that.
Oliphant, I'm going to have to ask that you dispense with your question because you're well over the 3 minute
Really?
mark. Yes.
Shocking. Thanks. Thanks, Minister.
So we now go to Madame LaRouche. You have a minute and a half.
Thank you, Chair and Vice Minister. Please do take time to get ready. We talk a great deal about money that's been recovered as a result of sanctions against Russia. Should each country develop legislation as to how they're going to use this money that's been collected through sanctions, or should there be a central body, for example, the UN, that would then redistribute this money to help with the reconstruction of Ukraine, which will be another important step for your region?
Thank you very much. I absolutely agree and subscribe to your words on the need to, in terms of Russia's responsibility, but at the same time speaking about future Ukraine's reconstruction, on the need to use, first of all, Russia's money, Russia's financial assets. And in this regard, many comprehensive discussions are going on various formats, EU, G7, among like-minded countries. So I truly believe that it would be great to find a common solution, international, on international platform to implement this initiative of frozen Russian assets and possible use of it for Ukraine's reconstruction.
Thank you. Madam McPherson, you have a minute and a half.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A minute and a half is not very much time, Vice Minister. So I just give you an opportunity, if I could, to speak. We now know the results of the Turkish election. Erdogan has been declared the winner. What will that mean for Vilnius? What will that mean for Sweden? If you could just take a few moments to comment on that.
My comment would be very short. We are looking to welcome Sweden as 32nd full-pledged member state at Vilnius NATO Summit.
And do you anticipate any challenges with that from Turkey?
We still have 4 weeks before Vilnius NATO Summit, enough time to finalize all needed procedures for to finish with ratification of Sweden's full-pledged membership in NATO.
So you're quite optimistic that that will proceed?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's fine. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam McPherson. So now we go to Mr. Hoback again for 3 minutes.
Vice Minister, I agree with you. I look forward to seeing Sweden at the table with everybody else at NATO. I'm just kind of curious, with Sweden and Finland joining NATO, how does that change the demographics or the functioning of NATO within Lithuania? How does that assist you? What kind of logistical issues do you face or challenges do you have that we can assist you with?
Thank you very much. It's no doubt that we in Baltic states, Lithuanians, Latvians, and Estonians are more than happy to having right now Finland as full-pledged member of NATO, but also in very near future, as I mentioned, we are optimistic welcoming Sweden. It's definitely will increase security and stability in our region. And traditionally, we have very good relations, very good cooperations with both Sweden and Finland. So it will give us a chance to even increase, intensify cooperation in the field of defense and security with both new allies.
I think it's just nothing but positive all the way around for all the countries involved, including, I look back here to Canada and our northern shore, which my colleague from Mr. Oliphant will always say that's a border to Russia as well. So you did talk about your 2.5%, possibly going to 3% of GDP in your military spending. How has that impacted your foreign aid? Is it maintained the same? I thought you said you spend 1% of GDP just on Ukrainian aid. Is that fair? Is that true?
Yeah, even more than 1%. We totally including military aid, humanitarian, economic, financial aid to Ukraine, starting from Russia's aggression against Ukraine. We spent more than 1 billion euros. That is around 1.4% of Lithuania's GDP. And taking this opportunity, I also would like to point out that Lithuanian civic society is very supportive to Ukraine. The Lithuanian people collected and donated more than 60 million euros for the needs of humanitarian needs of Ukrainian people, but also for needs of Ukrainian army, buying drones or anti-drones systems. So that is great example of strong and unwavering support also from Lithuanian people, not only from government institutions.
Thank you, Mr. Hoback. And now for the final question, we go to MP Sarai. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe just carrying on from there, Vice Minister, if you can say, let us know, you said the Lithuanian people are still very strong and supportive of the sanctions and the plight of sanctions against the Russians and the military support, at least by drones and others methods to Ukraine. Is that amongst your Baltic allies also maintaining, or is the population holding steadfast in their support for Ukraine and against Russia?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, in all three Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, will to support Ukraine remains very strong, because we know from our historic experience, it's many centuries long experience dealing with Russia. So our position is very clear. Ukrainians are fighting not only for their freedom and independence, they are fighting also for our freedom and independence. So it's not only our moral responsibility, moral obligation to support Ukrainians, but also if we are looking to our future, if we think about secure, peaceful future in Baltic states region, Baltic Sea region, Europe, and Euro-Atlantic community, we have to continue and to enhance our support to Ukraine.
And when you see places like Belarus or other of the ex-Soviet republics like Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, do you see public opinion shifting in there, feeling that they're boxed out because of their association with Russia versus countries like yourself who have allied with the West or with NATO and the European Union? Do you see their public perception or public loyalty switching as well?
Yes, we see some expressions and signs that the approach and, as you mentioned, the loyalty is switching, and I believe that Russia is losing its influence it had some decades ago in this region.
Thank you, Vice Minister, and thank you, Chair. I think that's all my time.
Thank you, MP Sarai, and thank you ever so much, Vice Minister Mylunash. It has truly been an honor and a privilege to have you here to share your insights and your expertise on the ongoing situation in Ukraine. I also know that I speak on behalf of all members of this committee when I thank you for everything you have done for Ukraine and for hosting the next NATO summit next month in your beautiful capital of Vilnius. Thank you very much for being with us. Now, members, before we leave, a couple of housekeeping matters. First one is with respect to the Subcommittee on International Human Rights Committee. They have prepared a report, a draft report on the residential school situation in Tibet. Just have to go through the motions. I just wanted to make sure that everyone is fully in favor of adopting that draft report, that the report be entitled The Human Rights Situation of Tibetans and the Chinese Residential Boarding School and Preschool System, that the chair, clerk, and analyst be authorized to make such grammatical and editorial changes as may be necessary without changing the substance of the report, that pursuant to the Standing Order 109, the committee requests that the government table a comprehensive response to the report, and that the dissenting or supplementary opinions be in Calibri 12-point font, left aligned, single-spaced, and be submitted electronically in both official languages to the clerk of the committee no later than 4 p.m. on Wednesday, June 14th. So that's tomorrow, but I don't think there's going to be a dissenting report. And finally, that the chair present the report to the House. So unanimous consent to that? Excellent. Now, going on to the other report, which has to do with sexual and reproductive health and rights of women globally. As you all know, the report has been finalized. We expect to receive a dissenting opinion today, I believe.
When the report will be tabled, it will be included.
Okay, it will be included when it is tabled. So a couple of things. First of all, with respect to news release, when the report is finally tabled, just wanted to ensure that the members agree that the analysts and the clerk, in consultation with the chair, prepare a news release for publication on the committee's website and for distribution upon presentation of the report to the House. Is that agreeable to everyone?
Report?
Probably Thursday, I think.
Thursday? Okay.
So that's that. And last and finally, with respect to scheduling a press conference, that the clerk of the committee make the necessary arrangements for a press conference to be held on Monday, June 19th, after the presentation of the committee's report to the House, and that the committee be represented by the chair and a representative from each party. Everyone in agreement? Excellent.
Just want
Thank you so much. Meeting
Point of
adjourned.
order.
Thursday is likely when it's going to be tabled.
4 days later?
Would be on the Monday.
5 days later.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Ms.
Oui.
Benayoun.
J'aimerais juste demander une clarification.
I'd just like to ask for some clarification because earlier my Conservative colleague had asked for the witness that we've just heard from should be added to our Wagner Group study. Did I correctly understand that?
Document that talked about what they did in Lithuania. Yeah. So just that, not,
Thank you for clarifying.
yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you ever so much, everyone. The meeting stands adjourned.